the Great Sphinx of Giza. Its face is perhaps the most recognized stone portrait on Earth. But what if the real mystery has nothing to do with its face, and everything to do with the ground just beneath its right front paw? For nearly a century, a persistent tradition has claimed that this exact spot conceals an entrance, a doorway to a sealed room known as the Hall of Records, a library, supposedly, containing the missing pages of human history, the knowledge of a world before our own. The location was named not by an archaeologist but in the 1930s by a trance-based source, Edgar Cayce, and yet the Sphinx itself is not a stray legend. Official archaeology places it firmly in the world of the 4th dynasty pharaoh Khafre, part of a vast royal complex built around 2500 BC. The case is strong, grounded in the surrounding temples and the very stone from which the monument was carved. But then, in 1991, modern science arrived. Geophysicists brought instruments to the plateau and aimed them at the very ground around the pores, listening for echoes from the bedrock below. A prophecy, a royal monument, and a scientific signal. 3 completely different ways of knowing, all colliding at one small patch of sand and stone. This is the true starting point of the mystery. Not whether a lost library is a proven fact, but why does this precise place keep pulling people back? Why does the right paw of the Sphinx continue to unite dreamers, surveyors, and archaeologists if the story is already closed? Our investigation will follow this question, from the official monument to the traces beneath the stone. If you find this subject compelling, we invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're watching from, or the time of day it is for you. It helps us understand our audience. Before any search for a hidden door can be taken seriously, a fair investigation must first be willing to face the official monument in its full strength. A mystery is only as compelling as the evidence it is tested against. The Giza Plateau is less like a museum of separate objects, and more like a single, vast construction puzzle, frozen in time. When archaeologists look at the site, they are not just seeing a statue and 3 pyramids. They are seeing the logic of a work site. You can see which walls were built first, which stones were cut from which bedrock, and which ceremonial pathways were designed to connect it all. It is in this physical logic that the Sphinx finds its accepted owner. The monument is not isolated. It sits at the low end of a long stone causeway, a ceremonial road that acts like a spine, connecting the pyramid of the pharaoh Khafre to his valley temple, down near the ancient floodplain of the Nile. The Sphinx is positioned like a colossal guardian alongside this royal road. It is part of the sequence, but the connection is more than just location. It is geological. The Sphinx was not built but carved, liberated from a U-shaped ditch cut into the limestone bedrock, and the massive blocks used to build the temple directly in front of it, the Sphinx temple, are a direct match to the layers of limestone removed from that very ditch. The temple is made from the body of the quarry that created the Sphinx. The stones are telling a story of a single continuous building project. Taken together, this evidence does not simply suggest Khafre's name. It presents a coherent architectural sentence, written in stone across the plateau. A pyramid, a causeway, 2 temples, and a guardian, all integrated in a single, massive effort during the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BC. And this is precisely what makes the other question so persistent. If the case is so clear, if the monument is so firmly anchored to this time and place, why has it become a vessel for so many other stories? Why does the ground beneath it continue to pull at our imagination with such force? The strength of the official case does not close the door on the mystery. It raises the stakes. It means any alternative possibility must be powerful enough to coexist with this formidable body of evidence. To understand that possibility, we have to look closer, not just at the monument's place in the landscape, but at the very stone it is made of. For the Great Sphinx is not simply built upon the Giza Plateau, it is the plateau. To understand the Sphinx, we must first understand the ground it came from, because unlike the pyramids, built from blocks quarried and moved, the Sphinx was not placed upon the Giza Plateau. It is the plateau. It is a portion of the living bedrock, a limestone hill left behind by the quarrymen of the 4th dynasty, who cut away the stone around it to build the temples and tombs of their kings. The monument is inseparable from the earth it guards. Imagine a sculptor choosing a single, colossal block of stone. From the outside it appears uniform, but as the artist carves, they discover veins of harder material and pockets of softer, more fragile stone running through it. The sculptor must work with the block's internal character, not against it. The final form of the statue will be a story told by both the artist's hand and the stone's own ancient nature. The bedrock of Giza is precisely such a block. Geologists call it the Mokattam Formation, but it can be thought of more simply as a layered history of an ancient sea compressed into stone. These layers are not all the same. They have different densities, different impurities, and different strengths. And this simple geological fact has profound consequences for the monument. For thousands of years, the wind and the sand, the moisture and the salt have worked upon the Sphinx. But they have not worked upon it evenly. Different layers of stone resist time in different ways. The head of the Sphinx is carved from a harder, more durable layer of limestone. It is dense, and it has held its form against the slow assault of erosion with remarkable integrity. But the body, the neck, the chest, the lion's flank, these are carved from layers that are progressively softer, more porous, and more susceptible to decay. The result is a profound visual contradiction. We see a face of serene, enduring power, atop a body that seems to be dissolving, deeply scarred and wounded by a timescale that feels immensely older. The very substance of the monument creates a puzzle, a feeling of two different ages fused into one being. The Sphinx is not just a royal portrait. It is a geological witness, and its own body is the first most complicated piece of testimony in its long history. A witness, however, can fall silent. For long periods of its existence, this great stone body was buried, forgotten, and reclaimed by the desert that had birthed it, and when it was rediscovered, it was often seen not as a work of human hands, but as a feature of the sacred landscape itself, a god sleeping in the sand. For most of its long life, the Great Sphinx has not been the creature we know. For thousands of years, it was a ghost in the landscape, a colossal head rising from an ocean of sand. The desert, in its patient, tireless way, had reclaimed the quarry from which it was born. The lion's body, the powerful haunches, the outstretched paws, all were buried. Generations of people living and dying in the shadow of the pyramids would have known only the face gazing east, a silent, disembodied king emerging from the earth itself. This image of a lone head, detached from its powerful body, shaped how the monument was understood. It was not a guardian at a gate, but a presence from the ground. It was an oracle, a remnant of a forgotten age so ancient that even the builders of the new kingdom saw it as a relic. The sand that buried it also transformed it, turning a royal monument into a pure elemental mystery. And in the shadow of that mystery a young prince once rested. Sometime in the 15th century BC, a man who was not yet pharaoh, Thutmose IV, was hunting on the Giza plateau. Tired from the sun, he lay down to sleep near the great stone head. And there, according to the story he would later tell, he had a dream. In this dream, the Sphinx itself spoke to him. It introduced itself as the god Hora Makhet, and it made the young prince a promise. It said that if he would clear away the sand that had accumulated for centuries, the sand that was choking its body and wearing away its stone, he would be rewarded with the throne of all Egypt. It was a divine contract, offered in a dream, a promise of kingship in exchange for an act of restoration. When Thutmose awoke, he took the dream as prophecy. He ordered the sand to be cleared, revealing the body of the lion for the first time in ages, and, as the dream foretold, he did indeed become pharaoh. To commemorate this event, to make his divine contract permanent, he erected a massive granite tablet between the newly cleared front paws of the Sphinx. We call it the Dream Stela. It still stands there today. This story is significant because it happened more than 1,000 years after the Sphinx was carved. The monument was already an ancient mystery to the ancient Egyptians. They were, in a sense, the first archaeologists of their own past, rediscovering and reinterpreting a monument whose original purpose had faded from memory. And in this act of rediscovery, the space between the paws was transformed. It was no longer just the ground in front of a statue. It became the place of communication, a threshold where a man spoke with a god, where a bargain for a kingdom was struck. The paws were not merely the foundation of the monument, they were the frame for a divine message. The idea that this specific place is a point of contact, a place of secrets and promises, is not a modern invention. It is a story the monument has been telling about itself for more than 3,000 years. The sand was cleared and a story was sealed in stone. But the desert is patient, and the work of Thutmose did not last forever. The sand would return, and with it, new generations of people who would look at the half-buried guardian and ask once again what it was hiding. The promise inscribed on the Dream Stealer, a kingdom for clearing the sand, was not just a legend for one future pharaoh, it became a pattern. For much of its long history, the Sphinx was not the creature we see today, standing clear in its enclosure. It was a head and shoulders rising from an ocean of sand, a half-buried guardian whose true scale was a matter of rumour. Long before modern archaeology, this state of being half-hidden invited a very human impulse – to dig. In the early 19th century, the approach was not one of delicate brushes and careful documentation. It was a physical contest. One of the first to take on the challenge in the modern era was a Genoese sea captain named Giovanni Caviglia. In 1817, he arrived at Giza, not with the tools of a scientist, but with the determination of an adventurer. His goal was simple and direct: to free the Sphinx from the sand that had reclaimed it. His efforts, and those of others who followed, were a study in frustration. The work was monumental, a battle fought with shovels against a foe that never tired. Crews of labourers would spend weeks, even months, clearing tons of sand from the chest and paws, only to have the desert winds pour it all back in, sometimes in a single night. The pits they dug would collapse. The progress they made would vanish. It was as if the landscape itself was actively protecting the monument, trying to pull it back under. This constant struggle, this sense of the Sphinx resisting its own revelation, became part of its story. The monument that would not be fully cleared felt like a monument that would not be fully known. And when a physical barrier proves too difficult to overcome, the human mind tends to go around it. The parts of the Sphinx that remained stubbornly buried, the ground that could not be reached or held clear, became a canvas for speculation. If the front of the monument was so hard to expose, what might lie concealed beneath it, in chambers protected not by doors, but by the weight of the desert itself? The early excavators were not searching for a specific named archive. They were driven by a more general curiosity, a treasure hunter's instinct that a monument this grand must have a secret heart. But their exhausting, incomplete work did something essential. It grounded the idea of a hidden space in real, physical effort. It established a 2-century-old tradition of trying to get to the bottom of the Sphinx. The vague hunt for any secret, however, was about to be given a precise and extraordinary map, one drawn not by an archaeologist, but from a source far stranger than the desert sand. The human effort to clear the sand from the Sphinx was a physical one, a battle of shovels against the desert. But in the 20th century, the search for a hidden door took a very different turn. It moved from the realm of archaeology and exploration into the realm of prophecy. The name that became inseparable from this search was Edgar Cayce. He was a man from Kentucky, not an archaeologist or historian, who from the 1920s to the 1940s would enter a trance-like state and deliver what he called readings on thousands of subjects. For a general audience, the concept can be understood simply. He was a mystic who claimed to access a universal source of information while asleep. And in several of these readings, he spoke of ancient Egypt. According to this tradition, before the sinking of the legendary continent of Atlantis, its people had gathered their most important historical and spiritual records. To preserve this knowledge, they constructed a deep, hidden archive. This archive, Cayce's readings claimed, was not just a myth. It was a physical place with a name, the Hall of Records, and it had a location. It was said to lie sealed in a chamber beneath the bedrock of the Giza Plateau, near the right front paw of the Great Sphinx. Now, this account does not come from ancient papyrus, nor from inscriptions carved in stone. It originates entirely from these psychic readings. It is a belief-based tradition, separate from the language of geology or the findings of archaeology. But whether one accepts its source or not, this idea had a powerful and undeniable effect on the real world. For the first time, the vague, centuries-old rumours of a secret under the Sphinx had a name, a detailed story, and most importantly, a precise target. The search was no longer for a random tunnel or a forgotten tomb. The search was now for the Hall of Records. The legend had provided a map, and that map pointed directly to the ground beside the Sphinx's right paw. The mystery now had an architecture, a purpose that would inspire and guide a new generation of seekers for decades to come. A belief, born in a trance, had given the ancient stone a new and dangerous possibility. The next question was inevitable. What happens when this mystical map is taken seriously by people with scientific tools? What happens when you try to measure a dream? For decades, the question of a chamber beneath the Sphinx remained a matter of speculation, of faith, and of digging in the sand. But in the year 1991, the nature of the search changed. A small team arrived at the Giza Plateau not with shovels and picks, but with instruments designed to see through solid rock. They came to perform a series of seismic surveys. The technique is a way of listening to the Earth. It involves creating a small, controlled vibration at the surface, like a gentle tap on a vast stone drum, and then measuring the echoes that travel through the ground and bounce back. Just as a doctor might listen to the sound of a patient's breathing, a geophysicist can listen to the way these vibrations travel. If the stone is solid and uniform, the echo returns in a predictable way. But if it encounters a crack, a different type of rock, or an empty space, the echo changes. The sound wave slows down or scatters or disappears. The team was led by geologist Robert Schoch, working alongside geophysicist Thomas Dobecki. Their stated purpose was twofold. First, they intended to use their instruments to analyse the weathering patterns on the Sphinx, and within its enclosure, a line of inquiry that would soon open its own profound debate. But their second goal brought them directly to the threshold of the legend. They were there to search for any evidence of subsurface cavities or anomalies, directly responding to the persistent traditions of hidden chambers beneath the monument. This was a critical moment of convergence, a place where a century of rumour, prophecy and esoteric belief met the quiet, physical discipline of measurement. The question that had been passed down through old books and psychic readings was now being put to the stone itself. The investigation had shifted from the library to the laboratory. The question was no longer simply what a prophecy described, but what the bedrock itself would report when asked by an instrument. For the first time, it seemed possible to get an answer that wasn't an interpretation of a dream or a text, but a reading of the physical ground. The stakes of the mystery were suddenly higher. An answer, whether it was the discovery of a void or the confirmation of solid rock, felt closer, more tangible than ever before. The team prepared their equipment and began to listen. In 1991, the team of geophysicist Thomas Dobecki and geologist Robert Schoch brought their instruments to the foot of the Sphinx, and when they processed their data, the silent limestone of the Giza Plateau appeared to offer a response. The survey detected several subsurface anomalies, places where the bedrock behaved in unexpected ways. To understand what an anomaly is, it helps to think of it like tapping on a wall in an old house. Most of the wall sounds solid, but then, in one spot, your knuckles make a hollow sound. That sound is an anomaly. It is a real, physical signal that something is different behind the surface. But it doesn't tell you what. It could be a hidden room, or it could be a plumbing pipe, a structural gap, or a natural crack in the plaster. The hollow sound is a question, not an answer. And under the pores of the Sphinx, Dobecki and Schoch detected several such hollow sounds. Their instruments registered a number of low-velocity zones, pockets where the seismic waves moved more slowly, suggesting a cavity or less dense material. Several of these were found under and around the pores of the monument. More than that, some of the anomalies, according to their report, appeared to be regular in shape, some even suggesting rectangular forms. This was the moment where the story shifts. A belief, born from the trance readings of Edgar Cayce decades earlier, now seemed to have a corresponding echo in the physical world. A modern scientific instrument listening to the bedrock had registered a disturbance in the precise area the prophecy had named. But here is the critical boundary, the line between a clue and a conclusion. An anomaly is not a chamber, a low-velocity zone is not a room, and a rectangular shape on a seismic graph is not a library filled with ancient scrolls. The instruments can hear a difference in the stone, but they cannot read its history or its purpose. They can reveal a question hidden in the rock, but they cannot tell us if that question was put there by nature or by human hands. The mystery was now deeper and in some ways more frustrating. A tangible piece of data existed, a signal that aligned with the legend, but it stopped short of proof. It created a space that could only be filled with speculation, or with more evidence. If the ground below the Sphinx was offering only echoes, Perhaps another part of the monument could speak more clearly. The surface of the stone itself and the scars it carries. The seismic echo fades, leaving a silence filled with ambiguity. The search for a hidden room beneath the pores has led to a question mark, a signal in the dark that refuses to name itself. But perhaps the most profound clue was never buried at all. Perhaps it has been standing in the open, in the full light of the Egyptian sun, for thousands of years. We turn our attention from the ground beneath the Sphinx to the ground around it, the deep U-shaped ditch from which its body was carved. These are the enclosure walls, the sheer faces of limestone that form a perimeter around the monument. They are the quarry scar, the negative space left behind when the lion's body was liberated from the plateau. And these walls, like the Sphinx itself, have been a silent witness to the passing of ages. In the early 1990s, the geologist Robert Schoch, who had worked on the seismic surveys, looked at these walls and saw a story that seemed to contradict the accepted history. He observed that the weathering patterns were not what he expected to see from millennia of wind and sand. Wind erosion tends to cut sharp, horizontal lines, carving out the softer layers of rock more aggressively. But on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, particularly on the western side, the dominant pattern is different. Here the stone is marked by deep vertical fissures. The profile of the wall is not sharp and angular, but soft, rounded, and undulating, like a surface that has been worn down by water running over it from above for a very long time. It is a classic signature of precipitation weathering, the kind of erosion caused by heavy, sustained rainfall. This idea is not impossible. The climate of the Giza Plateau has not always been the hyper-arid desert we see today. Go back far enough, and the record shows a different world, a greener Sahara that experienced periods of significant rainfall. Here, however, is the contradiction. The last of these major wet periods is understood to have ended thousands of years before the reign of Khafre in the 4th dynasty. The time of heavy rains was long over by the time the pyramids were supposedly being built. The implication is unavoidable and immense. If the deep weathering on the enclosure walls was carved by ancient rains, then the walls themselves must have been standing there to receive those rains. The ditch had to have been cut, and the Sphinx carved, long before the accepted timeline. Suddenly the mystery is not just about a possible chamber hidden beneath the stone, it is about the age of the entire monument. A powerful, visible argument, written in the language of geological decay, now puts direct pressure on the established history. But stone can be a deceptive witness. And there is another way to read these scars. The image of water carving stone over millennia is a powerful one. It gives the Sphinx enclosure the feeling of a calendar, written in a language older than any dynasty. The vertical fissures and rounded hollows seem to speak of a different sky, a wetter world. But in science, a compelling story is not enough. It must also be the only story that fits the evidence. And for the scars on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, heavy rainfall is not the only explanation offered. The counter-argument begins not with the sky, but with the stone itself. It proposes that the limestone of the Giza Plateau was not a perfect, uniform block waiting for a sculptor. It was, in a sense, a patient with pre-existing conditions. The Mokattam Formation, from which the Sphinx is carved, is a layered cake of ancient seabed, and not all layers are of equal quality. Some are hard and durable, like the stone used for the head. Others, particularly in the lower body and the enclosure floor, are softer, more porous, and riddled with natural cracks and fissures from the start. This inherent weakness, this differential weathering we have seen before, means the rock was always going to age unevenly, with or without a single drop of rain. But there is another force at work here, one more subtle and persistent than a storm. It is the action of salt. For thousands of years, moisture from groundwater has wicked up into the porous limestone walls. This water carries dissolved salts. As the intense Egyptian sun heats the rock, the water evaporates, but the salt is left behind. It forms crystals within the pores of the stone. With each cycle of wetting and drying, these crystals grow, exerting a slow, immense pressure from within. This process, known as haloclasty, can flake, fracture, and pry apart even solid rock, creating deep recesses and rounded weathering that can look remarkably similar to the action of flowing water. It is a quiet, relentless demolition from the inside out. Here, the investigation turns. The critical question becomes, when did this weathering happen? Geologists who favour the conventional timeline point out that much of this erosion, both from the rock's natural weaknesses and from salt action, could have been happening for thousands of years before the first sculptor ever arrived. They were not carving a pristine quarry. They were carving into a landscape that already had a long and complex geological history. The deep fissures and weak points may have already been present in the bedrock. This changes the reading of the evidence entirely. The carvers, in cutting down into the plateau to isolate the block for the Sphinx, might not have been creating a fresh surface. Instead, they may have simply revealed the rock's ancient scars to the sky for the first time. In this view, the vertical patterns are not a record of rain falling on a finished statue. They are the ghost of the rock's own deep history. An echo of ancient water channels and natural weaknesses that existed long before the lion had a human face. The result is not a simple answer, but a deeper, more challenging mystery. The enclosure wall is no longer a straightforward witness for one side. It has become a contested space, where one group sees the memory of ancient rain, and another sees the inherent fragility of the stone itself. The timeline is not settled by the scars, it is simply made more complex, and if the visible surface of Giza can hold such ambiguity, it forces us to ask what lies beneath it, in spaces that are not disputed at all. The Giza Plateau is known to be honeycombed with real, confirmed shafts, tombs, and passages, a silent world entirely separate from any single theory. If the surface of the stone is a contested witness, the ground beneath the Giza Plateau holds secrets that are no longer in dispute. The bedrock here is not a solid, unbroken shield. After millennia of use as a sacred landscape and a city for the dead, it has become something more complex. It is perforated with tombs, shafts, and passages cut across different eras for different purposes. One of the most profound of these is a feature sometimes called the Osiris Shaft. Located along the causeway connecting Khafre-era's pyramid to the valley, it begins as a simple opening in the rock. But it is a threshold to a deep and complex descent. A first shaft drops into a small chamber. From the floor of that room, a second, deeper shaft continues downward. At its base, nearly 30 meters below the surface, lies a final chamber, often submerged in the groundwater that saturates the plateau. Here, in the quiet darkness, rests a massive granite sarcophagus, surrounded by pillars carved from the living rock. The existence of such a place is not a theory. It confirms, without any doubt, that complex multi-level structures were engineered deep into the Giza bedrock. It is a testament to the ancient builders' capacity to work far beneath the surface. But here, context is everything. The Osiris Shaft is not a mystery without an answer. Archaeological analysis places its final construction not in the age of the pyramids, but much later during the 26th dynasty, around the 6th century BC. It is understood by Egyptologists not as an archive for a lost world, but as a potent symbolic tomb for Osiris, the god of the underworld, built in a time of renewed reverence for the ancient Giza monuments. And this reveals a crucial discipline required on the plateau. The discovery of one hidden space does not validate every legend about another. A real, sacred tomb from the late period is not evidence for a prehistoric library. Each mystery must be met on its own terms, with its own evidence. The presence of such a profound and fragile site creates an immediate and difficult question. When the ground holds real tombs and sacred spaces, who decides when and where to search for more, and what is the price of looking? The discovery of real, complex underground structures like the Osiris Shaft complicates the search. It confirms that the bedrock beneath Giza is not a simple, solid floor. It is a landscape in its own right. But this confirmation also raises a difficult question. If the ground is perforated with history, why not simply excavate any anomaly that appears on a survey? Why not drill down and resolve the question of the Hall of Records once and for all? The answer lies in understanding that the Giza Plateau is not a wilderness to be explored. It is more like an ancient crime scene, where the evidence of a civilization is scattered everywhere. An investigator cannot simply tear down the walls to find a clue. The act of searching, if done carelessly, can destroy the very thing being sought. Every square meter of ground is potentially an undisturbed piece of the past. To break into it without absolute certainty is to risk erasing a page of history forever, in the hope of finding a lost library. The cost of being wrong is irreversible. For this reason, the entire area, as part of the Memphis necropolis, is a protected World Heritage Site under the care of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO. Any intrusive work requires a rigorous process of permits and oversight from Egypt's heritage authorities. This is not simple bureaucracy. It is a system designed to weigh the potential for discovery against the certainty of damage. This caution is not abstract. The plateau is a dense tapestry of known history. It contains thousands of recorded tombs, chapels, and ritual pits. It is presumed to contain countless more that have never been opened. The ground itself is the archive. It is a fragile, finite record of lives and beliefs, and a careless shovel is a profound threat to that record. And yet, this creates a difficult and understandable human tension. To the outside world, a necessary protection can feel like a deliberate secret. A process designed to be careful can appear to be a way of preventing a search. A permit that is denied, even for sound archaeological reasons, can be interpreted as a cover-up. This is the locked file effect. A door that is closed for safety can become, in the imagination, a door that guards a forbidden truth. The desire to know is powerful, and it does not sit patiently. So the conflict is not a simple story of heroic searchers and obstructive authorities. It is a genuine, difficult tension between two legitimate values: the responsibility to preserve what we have and the deep human need to discover what we have lost. The question then becomes, if the shovel is too great a risk, how can the search continue? How does one look inside a sealed room without breaking down the door? The tension between preservation and curiosity feels like an impossible problem. To open the ground is to risk destroying the very thing you seek. To leave it sealed is to allow speculation to fill the silence. But in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, a new path began to emerge. Not a compromise, but a transformation in how we see the past. Archaeology began to develop new senses. It learned to listen to the stone with vibrations, as we have seen. But it also learned to see with pulses of radio waves, to touch with beams of light, and to map with an inhuman precision from the air. This is a quieter form of exploration, but in many ways more profound. Organizations like Ancient Egypt Research Associates, or AERA, have spent decades undertaking this work. Using tools like ground-penetrating radar, GPR, they can send signals beneath the sand to search for changes in density that might indicate a buried wall, a void, or a change in the natural geology. With laser scanning and a technique called photogrammetry, they can measure every surface of the Sphinx and its enclosure, creating a perfect digital twin of the monument, accurate to within millimeters. This represents a fundamental shift in philosophy. For generations, the primary tool of the archaeologist was the trowel. The work was an act of careful subtraction, removing one layer of history to reveal the one below it. But this new approach is an act of meticulous recording. The goal is no longer simply to open the mysterious box. It is to create a flawless digital replica of the box itself. Every crack, every tool mark, every repair, every scar of erosion, and to make that record available to researchers all over the world. It is a slow, patient answer to the problem of the locked file. The information is not being forced from the stone, it is being copied from it, respectfully, so that the monument can be both protected and understood. This path offers a way forward, one that honours the immense responsibility of guarding a world treasure while still pursuing the questions that refuse to go away. The investigation does not need to end in frustration. It can instead become more intelligent, more collaborative, and more transparent. But a more detailed map is not always a simpler one. Sometimes seeing more clearly only reveals a landscape far more complex than anyone had imagined. These new senses of archaeology, this ability to map the unseen, naturally leads to the most direct question of all. What have they found? After decades of increasingly sophisticated surveys, what does the digital ghost of Giza actually show? It helps to think of it like a revolution in medical imaging. For years, a doctor might rely on a simple X-ray, which shows the basic structure of bone. But then, a high-resolution MRI becomes available. It produces a stunningly detailed picture, revealing not just the bone, but muscle, tissue, and fluid. The doctor sees the original problem with incredible clarity, but they also see dozens of tiny, ambiguous shadows and variations that were completely invisible before. Is each one a new cause for alarm, or is it just the complex, noisy reality of a living body finally seen in full? This is the new reality at Giza. The patient work of groups like Ancient Egypt Research Associates, using ground-penetrating radar and other tools, has not returned a simple, empty map. On the contrary, the scans have revealed a landscape far more complex than ever imagined. They have mapped numerous subsurface anomalies, voids, and previously unknown features hidden just beneath the sand. The scans confirm that the bedrock of the Giza Plateau is not a simple solid block. It is perforated, layered, and has a long and complicated history of its own. But this explosion of new data creates a profound new problem. Each new signal, each newly mapped hollow is another question mark. The digital map becomes crowded with possibilities. That anomaly could be a natural cave, weathered into the limestone over millennia. It could be a minor unfinished tomb from a later period. It might be a water channel or a geological fissure, or it could be something else entirely. The instruments, for all their power, cannot provide that final layer of meaning. They simply add another location to the list of places that now demand a closer look, another hollow sound in the wall waiting for an explanation. We have arrived at a modern paradox. Our technological ability to find potential mysteries is now outpacing our ability to responsibly verify them. The search has not failed, it has fractured into 100 different searches. We can listen to the stone more sensitively than ever before, but the stone now speaks in a chorus of echoes, and we cannot yet be sure which voice, if any, holds the story we are looking for. This complexity, this flood of ambiguous signals, forces the entire investigation back to a single, fundamental test. With so many potential doors, how would we recognize the one that truly matters? The journey so far has taken us through layers of bedrock and belief. We have followed the logic of the royal builders, the visions of a sleeping prophet, and the silent pulses of seismic waves sent into the stone. We have stood before the enclosure walls trying to read the scars of deep time. We have seen how a protected heritage site can become a landscape of locked files and unanswered questions, and how new technologies are slowly, carefully creating a new kind of map. But a map of signals is not the same as a destination. After all of this, after the echoes and anomalies, the contested timelines and the human longing, the investigation arrives at its most important and most difficult question. What would proof of a hall of records actually look like? This is not a question meant to dismiss the idea, but to take it with the utmost seriousness. Imagine for a moment the permits are granted, the work is authorized. The goal is no longer to speculate, but to verify. If you were the archaeologist standing on the sand before the Sphinx, tasked with confirming the existence of a hidden library, where would you begin? The first requirement, the most fundamental standard, would be a clear and verifiable access route. An archive is a room. A room by its nature is a space designed to be entered and exited. It cannot be a theoretical void, completely sealed within millions of tons of solid limestone. It must possess a door, a shaft, a tunnel, a physical threshold that connects it to the world. This is the point where the existing evidence comes into sharp focus. The belief-based tradition of Edgar Cayce gave us a precise location for a possible entrance, near the right front paw. The seismic surveys gave us anomalies, places where the bedrock returned a different echo, but a specific claim and an ambiguous signal do not by themselves constitute a doorway. No confirmed man-made entrance or no passage or shaft leading to an undocumented chamber in that location has ever been cleared, mapped, and verified by archaeologists. The hollow sound in the wall has not yet resolved into a handle on a door, and so the mystery does not vanish, it becomes more disciplined. We now have the first rule of a fair test. We have a standard. Finding such an entrance would be a discovery that would reshape the history of the Giza Plateau, but it would only be the beginning. The next test, the true measure of the claim, would lie on the other side of that threshold. Beyond a verifiable entrance, any potential chamber beneath the Sphinx would face a second, even more rigorous test, the test of context. In archaeology, it is not enough to find an object. What matters is where it is found and what it is found with. An artifact discovered alone, without context, is like a single word on a blank page. It could mean almost anything. But that same artifact found within a sealed, undisturbed layer of earth, surrounded by other objects from the same period, is like a word inside a complete sentence. Its meaning becomes specific, locked in by its surroundings. For a discovery like the Hall of Records to be verified, it would need to exist within such a sentence. The entrance, the passageway, the chamber itself, and any contents within would need to be sealed in a pristine, undisturbed archaeological layer. This means finding a sequence of earth and stone that has not been altered since the time it was first closed. This is the fundamental principle that separates archaeology from simple treasure hunting. It is how investigators can distinguish an authentic ancient tomb from a clever modern hoax, or a ritual space from a natural cave that was filled by chance. The layers of the earth are pages in a history book, and for the story to be credible, the pages must be in the correct order, and the binding must be unbroken. Here, however, the test becomes immensely difficult. The ground around the Great Sphinx is not a sealed, pristine environment. It is one of the most disturbed and manipulated landscapes on Earth. For more than 4,000 years, it has been a site of worship, of neglect, of restoration, and of excavation. It has been buried by sand for centuries at a time, then cleared by pharaohs like Thutmose IV. It was cleared again by Roman governors, and later by 19th century explorers like Giovanni Caviglia, whose digging left its own marks. It has been repaired, patched, and studied. The local water table has risen and fallen, seeping through the porous limestone. Finding a truly ancient sealed context, a page from a book that has never been opened since it was first written, would be an extraordinary challenge. The problem, therefore, is not simply finding a room. The greater problem is proving when that room was sealed. Without that proof, without that undisturbed sentence in the earth, any chamber could be anything. A forgotten tomb from a later dynasty, a natural cavern, or even a storage space from a much more recent construction project. The standard is high because the ground itself holds a complicated, overlapping memory. And yet, even if an explorer managed to overcome all of this, finding a clear entrance, and proving it led to a chamber that was sealed in a datable ancient context, the final and most decisive test would still remain. It would rest entirely on the nature of the records themselves, but even if an entrance were found and a chamber confirmed, two final tests would remain: the nature of the records themselves, and the unglamorous, essential discipline of repeatable evidence. Consider the simple, physical challenge of time. If a library were to survive from an age thousands of years before the first pharaohs, what would its pages be made of? Papyrus, the medium of dynastic Egypt, is a fragile vessel for memory. It dissolves with moisture, brittles with age. Wood turns to dust. Any organic material would have long since returned to the earth. The records, therefore, would need a more permanent body. They would have to be inscribed on stone, etched onto tablets of metal, or perhaps preserved in a medium like crystal. They would need to be crafted from something capable of sleeping through millennia, untouched by the water that permeates the Giza bedrock. And beyond their physical form, their contents would need to be verifiable. They would have to contain information that could not be a later forgery, something that speaks with the authentic alien voice of a lost time. And finally, any discovery of this magnitude would need to be independently confirmed, not by one team with one set of instruments, but by several, different researchers using different methods, arriving at the same unambiguous result. This is the quiet standard for any claim that seeks to enter our shared history. It is not a barrier designed to protect old ideas, but a process designed to verify new ones. When we hold the story of the Hall of Records to this standard, a quiet and significant gap appears. We have a compelling belief tradition, pointing to a precise place. We have instrument readings that show anomalies in the bedrock, echoes and shadows that remain uninterpreted. We have a geological debate about scars on the stone walls, a debate that itself remains unsettled. But we do not have a confirmed access route. We do not have sealed, undisturbed archaeological layers. We do not have any recovered artifacts, not a single tablet, not one inscription, and we do not have a single repeatable signal that every instrument agrees is an artificial chamber, let alone a library. This test is not a judgment. It is a measurement, and it shows the distance between a question that is powerful and an answer that is proven. By understanding this standard, the mystery is not destroyed. It is clarified. We can now see the line between the evidence that exists and the evidence that would still be needed. And this clarity reveals a deeper question. If the physical proof is not there, why does the idea of a hidden library beneath the Sphinx remain so powerfully alive? After establishing the high bar for physical evidence, the question of the Sphinx seems to reach a quiet impasse. The instruments offer echoes, the stone offers a contested history, and the ground remains protected. But perhaps the most powerful reason the monument continues to feel like an unanswered question has less to do with what is found, and more to do with what it is. Look at it. The form is not passive. It is a creature at rest, but also on watch. It faces the rising sun, a silent sentinel whose purpose seems to be more than just existing. It feels like a guardian. This is not a modern fantasy. It's an ancient and deeply human pattern. Cultures across the world, many with no known contact, have felt an instinct to place powerful hybrid beings at the thresholds of important places. An ordinary door might have a lock, but the entrance to a palace, a temple, or a tomb, that requires something more. It requires a guard that does not sleep. In the ancient palaces of Assyria, colossal figures known as Lamassu stood at the gates. They were winged bulls with the heads of men, radiating a calm and overwhelming power. They were not merely decorations, they were the embodiment of the threshold itself, separating the ordinary world outside from the sacred or royal space within. They were a living boundary, carved in stone. The Great Sphinx is not an outlier in this tradition. It is perhaps its most profound and enduring example. It sits at the edge of a sacred landscape, a necropolis dedicated to the journey of kings into eternity. It is the ultimate guardian, a fusion of animal strength and human intelligence. But seeing this pattern raises a critical question. Does a shared idea of a guardian prove that all these cultures learned from a single, lost teacher? Does it point to a forgotten global civilization that left behind these common symbols? Or does it suggest something more intimate about the human mind? That when we create places of great power or deep meaning, we feel an instinctive need to give them a protector. That the idea of a threshold guardian is not a memory of a lost empire, but a fundamental piece of our own mental architecture. The pattern may not reveal a shared history, but a shared psychology. This is why the Sphinx feels like it should be guarding a secret. The expectation is written into its very form, its posture, its gaze, its sheer scale. All of these things communicate its role. We feel a pull to look beneath its paws because for thousands of years our ancestors have understood that creatures like this are placed where something of immense value is kept. The idea of a hidden chamber is not just a modern legend. It is the logical completion of the story the monument itself seems to be telling. And if the job of a guardian is to protect what is most precious, what could be more precious to a civilization than its own memory? The guardian stands at the threshold, but what does it protect? The story of the Hall of Records is not, at its core, a story about treasure. It is not a myth of gold, or jewels, or lost technologies of power. It is a library story. Its promise is not wealth, but wholeness. The prize it offers is knowledge, a complete and undamaged memory of who we are. Human history is a record of loss. We are a species haunted by burned libraries, by texts that survive only as fragments, by entire languages that have gone silent. The Library of Alexandria is not just a single historical event. It is a symbol of the fragility of our collective mind. We live inside a story with missing pages, with entire chapters torn out by fire, flood, and time. And so, the idea that somewhere, the most important of these missing pages were not destroyed, but were simply stored, kept safe in a sealed room, waiting for a future generation to be ready, is one of an almost unbearable power. This profound longing for a recoverable past is the quiet engine driving the entire mystery of the Sphinx's chamber. It is why the seismic anomaly is more than a geological curiosity, and why the water-eroded scars feel like more than just weathering. They feel like clues in a story we desperately need to be true. Perhaps then, the legend of the Hall of Records has survived for so long not because of the strength of the evidence for it, but because of the strength of our need for it. We are searching for a room beneath the stone, but we're hoping to find a cure for our own forgetting. It is a story that answers one of the deepest anxieties of a species that knows it has lost its own beginnings. To understand this is to see the search in a new light. It changes the question from a simple, "Is it real?" to a more compassionate one. Why does this story matter so much to us? It matters because it is a map of hope, pointing to a place where our broken history might be made whole again. So after this long journey through stone and sand, through instrument readings and ancient traditions, what is the Sphinx? It is not one single thing. It is a layered archive, a place where many different kinds of memory converge. Perhaps then, the final secret of the Sphinx is not a single truth, but a way of seeing. It asks us not to choose one story, but to hold many at once, to see the monument not as one object, but as a layered archive where each layer of meaning rests upon the others without erasing them. Imagine it like a series of transparent maps, laid one on top of another over the same piece of land. Each map shows something true, and only together do they reveal the full landscape. The first layer is the one archaeology has drawn most clearly. It is the Sphinx of the 4th dynasty, a royal monument carved from the living bedrock of the Giza Plateau, inextricably tied to the temples and causeways of the pharaoh Khafre. It is a guardian of a royal necropolis, a face of dynastic power. Beneath that, or perhaps inside it, is a second layer. This is the geological Sphinx, a body of ancient limestone from the Mokattam Formation, with its harder and softer beds. It is a witness not just to human history, but to a far deeper time. Its scars and fissures are a record of water, salt, and wind, a story told by the stone itself, in a language we are still learning to read. And resting on them both is a third layer, drawn in the ink of dreams and reverence. This is the Sphinx of Thutmose IV, Horemakhet, Horus in the horizon, an ancient god, sleeping in the sand, who could promise a kingdom in exchange for being remembered and set free, a place of divine encounter. Each of these layers is real. The royal monument does not cancel the geological witness. The divine dream site does not erase the royal monument. But then, we must add the modern charts, a new layer, drawn with the lines of seismic surveys and ground-penetrating radar, making the Sphinx a target for our instruments, a body to be scanned, a place of echoes and anomalies. Another layer, drawn by heritage organizations, marking the Sphinx as a protected site, a fragile piece of human memory that must be shielded from the very questions it inspires. And finally, the most transparent layer of all, the one we place there ourselves, the Sphinx as a mirror, a silent guardian onto which we project our own longing for a recoverable past, our hope that the missing pages of history were not burned, but were only sealed away, waiting for us under a silent paw. To see the monument this way is not to solve the mystery. It is to understand its shape. The Sphinx is not diminished by this complexity. It is made whole, and so, after all the maps and all the layers of meaning, we are brought back to the physical stone we started with, silent and unchanged. We return then to the stone itself, to the solid, silent facts of the Giza Plateau. We can now walk around this monument not as strangers, but as investigators who have followed its many threads. The physical evidence has not changed, but our way of seeing it has. We stand before the right front paw. It is no longer just a possible door to a hidden room. It is the place where a modern prophecy focused the energy of a search, a belief that became so powerful it drew scientific instruments to this one specific patch of ground. The paw did not open, but it did create a map of human longing, marking the spot where the desire for a lost history became a physical question. It is an anchor for a hope that has not disappeared. We look to the high walls of the enclosure, where the vertical scars run down the limestone. They are no longer a simple calendar, pointing decisively to a forgotten age of rain. They are a contested page of deep time. They hold the memory of the rock's own ancient history, of the salt and moisture that breathe through the plateau, and of the thousands of years of sun and wind since the monument was carved. The scars do not give us a single date. Instead, they give us a lesson in humility, a reminder that stone can be a difficult witness, capable of telling more than one story at the same time. And we think of the signals sent down into the bedrock, the echoes that returned from the seismic surveys. They are not a photograph of a lost library. They are the sound of a persistent question, made audible by our instruments. They are the signature of complexity, of natural fissures, or voids, or changes in the density of the rock. The instruments confirmed that the ground beneath the Sphinx is not simple or silent, but they could not translate its language. They gave us an echo, not a conversation, the right paw, the weathered scars, the subterranean echoes. None of these things, alone or together, meet the standard of proof for a lost archive, but the search for that proof has created something else. Perhaps the truest Hall of Records is not a sealed chamber waiting to be opened, but an open one that has been slowly built over centuries. It is an archive made of our own attention. Its catalogue includes the survey lines of modern mappers, the repair patches of conservationists, the inscriptions of a pharaoh's dream, and the persistent, quiet hope of millions who have stood here, wondering. The Sphinx has collected our questions, and in doing so has become a record of what we feel we have lost. The journey did not lead to a treasure room. It led to a deeper appreciation of the monument itself. A familiar face in the desert has become a layered, complex, and far more interesting entity. It is a royal monument, a geological puzzle, and a mirror for our own search for meaning. And one final thought remains. And so, after all the searching, what is the true secret the Great Sphinx keeps? Perhaps the secret is not a thing at all. Not a room, not a scroll, not a single final answer waiting in the dark. Perhaps the secret is a test of our capacity to hold competing ideas in our minds at the same time. The ordered world of a 4th dynasty king and the deep time scars of a world that may have come before. It is a test of our patience with ambiguity, the patience to see an echo on a screen and know that a signal is not a story, that a question is not yet a conclusion. It is a test of our respect for a past that does not yield its secrets easily, that pushes back with sand and silence, demanding more from us than just the force of our curiosity. And above all, it may be a test of our responsibility, a test of whether we can search for the missing pages of our own history without destroying the book itself. The Sphinx does not guard a simple door. It guards a boundary, a line between what we can prove, what we believe, and what we must have the grace to admit we do not yet know. Because of this, the question that began our journey, the question of what lies beneath the right paw, has not been answered, but it has not been erased. Instead, it has been transformed. Through the patient work of mapping and measuring, through the difficult work of listening to both stone and tradition, that question has become sharper, it has become more honest, and it has become much, much harder to dismiss. And so, in the end, we return to the stone, to the face that has watched the horizon for millennia, unchanged by the questions we ask of it, unmoved by the histories we write for it. The dawnlight catches the high lines of the cheekbones, the curve of the brow. It is a royal face, carved from the hardest layer of the Giza plateau, the stone that has endured. But below it, the body tells a different story, a body made of softer, more vulnerable layers, a body that has yielded to time, to the wind, and to the moisture held deep within the rock. It wears the scars of that long conversation, the deep vertical fissures that some have read as the memory of ancient rain, and others as the natural language of limestone itself, speaking of salt and weakness, and a history that began long before any sculptor arrived. The stone is not a simple page, it is a contested document, and beneath the stone there is only the echo of our own inquiry, the memory of seismic waves sent down into the dark to listen for a change in the silence. They returned with signals, whispers of a space, a void, a place where the bedrock was not what was expected. But an echo is not a voice. A signal is not a library. The ground beneath the paws holds our question, but it has not yet offered up an answer. For so long, the sand was the only guardian here. It rose in great tides, burying the monument to its neck, preserving it in a warm, dry silence. A silence that was only broken by a dream, a promise of kingship to a prince who would clear the sand and let the Sphinx breathe again. Centuries later, others came with shovels, fighting a losing battle against the desert, which seemed determined to reclaim its charge. Each generation thought themselves the last, the ones who would finally touch the foundation, find the entrance, and solve the riddle. They were followed by those who searched not with tools but with belief, who saw in the right paw not just a limb of stone, but a threshold, a door to a sealed room, a hall of records, where the memory of a world before our own might have been kept safe from flood and fire. It is a story of profound hope. The hope that nothing is ever truly lost, only misplaced, that the missing chapters are not burned, but simply waiting for us to find the key. After all the surveys, all the debates, all the maps and scans and arguments, the stone does not speak. But its silence is no longer empty. It is filled now, filled with the weight of our attention. The monument has absorbed our curiosity, our science, our longing. The face that was once just an image on a postcard has become a test, a mirror that reflects back the nature of our own search, how we balance evidence with belief, how we weigh the need to know against the duty to protect. The Great Sphinx guards its post. What it truly protects may not be a room full of scrolls. Perhaps it protects the question itself, keeping it safe, waiting for a time when we are ready to ask it in a new way, or perhaps to finally learn how to listen to the answer that has been here all along, in the silence of the stone and the stillness of the air. If we zoom in past the grand questions of origin and destiny, another layer of the archive reveals itself. It is written not in a hidden chamber, but on the very surface of the stone. It is the record of repair. Like the lines on a face or the scars on a body, each patch and block added to the Sphinx tells a story of injury, of care, and of survival across millennia. The monument we see today is not a pristine object from a single moment in time. It is a dialogue between the original carvers and every generation that followed. This conversation began in antiquity. When the young prince Thutmose IV cleared the sand from the monument's body in the New Kingdom, he did more than just reveal it. His workers undertook one of the first known major restoration campaigns, adding layers of smaller limestone blocks to shore up the heavily eroded body and pores, a protective skin against the wind and time. Centuries later, during the Roman occupation of Egypt, the Sphinx received another phase of attention. The Romans, practical builders, added more substantial casing stones, particularly around the pores and the sides of the body, creating a more robust architectural finish. They were not just preserving a relic, they were adopting it, integrating it into their vision of a timeless Egypt. In the early 20th century, the dialogue with the stone took a more urgent and ultimately damaging turn. Between 1925 and 1936, the French engineer Émile Barrès conducted a massive clearance and restoration project. Working with the technology of his day, he filled large cavities and patched crumbling sections with reinforced concrete. It was an effort born of a desire to save the monument from collapse, but the hard, impermeable cement trapped moisture within the softer, porous limestone. The cure in time began to worsen the disease, causing the original stone to crumble away behind the modern patches. By the late 20th century, conservation science had evolved. A meticulous, multi-decade project began, one that continues to this day. This new phase is a conversation of quiet apology and careful listening. The damaging cement of the Barrès era is painstakingly removed. Geologists search for new limestone from the original quarries, seeking stone with the same density and character. Each new block is shaped to fit, a modern hand trying to mimic the work of an ancient one. This is not a grand gesture, but a slow, patient process of healing. The monument we see now is a composite, a collaboration across 4,000 years. The original form is still there, but it is embraced and supported by the work of pharaohs, emperors, engineers, and scientists. The archive of the stone is not just a story of its making, but the ongoing story of its keeping. And this physical record of human intervention is only one part of the archive the Sphinx has gathered. We return to the image of an instrument reading, a line on a graph from a seismic survey, or a coloured patch on a screen from ground-penetrating radar. It is a modern form of listening to the earth, a signal sent down into the stone, and an echo that returns with the story. But the story is not written in a language we can easily read. It is more like standing outside a large ancient house, tapping on its stone walls and trying to draw a map of the interior based only on the echoes. You might hear a place where the sound changes, where it becomes deeper, more hollow. You have found a difference, an anomaly. But what have you truly found? Is it a vast empty room, or a small closet? Is it a structural beam made of a different material, or is it simply a section of the wall that is thicker or thinner than the rest? The echo tells you that something is different. It cannot tell you what it is, or why. The bedrock of the Giza Plateau is not a uniform, solid block. It is a complex, living geology, With its own history that began long before the first pharaoh, it is filled with natural fissures, cracks that have existed for millions of years. It holds pockets of softer, more heavily weathered limestone. The water table itself, the level of groundwater beneath the sand, rises and falls, creating saturated layers that can absorb or reflect a signal in misleading ways. Any of these natural features can create an echo that looks, to an hopeful eye, like an artificial chamber. A straight, natural crack in the limestone can return a signal that appears unnervingly geometric. This is why the conversation between the geophysicist who reads the instrument and the archaeologist who understands the long history of the site is so critical. The signal is not the end of the investigation. It is the beginning of a very careful and very difficult question. And here we find the most delicate part of the test. The very instruments that promise to bring us closer to the truth can also become powerful generators of new myths if their data is read without discipline. An anomaly, once measured, can be amplified by belief until it becomes a confirmed chamber in the public imagination. A low-velocity zone is not a library. An echo is not a doorway. The machine gives us a new way to ask the question, but it cannot protect us from hearing the answer we already want to hear. This is what elevates the search from a simple treasure hunt. It becomes a test of our own discipline, a measure of our ability to hold a compelling signal in our hands and resist the urge to immediately call it a discovery. It is a profound respect, not just for the monument, but for the slow and sometimes frustrating process of knowing. So, if a signal is found, and it can be repeated, the next question becomes even more important. What would that space have to contain? The dilemma facing the guardians of Giza is not unique. It is a weight felt at every place where the deep past has survived, miraculously, into our present. Consider the caves of Lascaux in southern France. Discovered in 1940, they were a sealed world, a gallery of art more than 17,000 years old, preserved in the cold, stable dark. When the caves were opened to the public after the war, the art began to die. The quiet, constant chemistry of human presence was the poison. The carbon dioxide from our breath, the humidity from our bodies, the alien spores and microbes we carry without thought, they began to cloud the paintings, feeding mould that grew like a cataract over the eyes of ancient basin. The very act of looking was a form of erasure. The cost of our wonder was the thing we wondered at. The solution was a painful one. In 1963, the original cave was sealed. It remains closed today, a sanctuary accessible only to a handful of scientists for a few hours a year. To satisfy our desire to see, meticulous replicas were built nearby, a way to share the memory without destroying the source. This is not secrecy for its own sake. It is a quarantine born of respect. It is an admission that sometimes our love is too corrosive for the thing we love. This same calculus of risk applies on a vast scale to the Giza Plateau. It is not a sterile theme park of a few giant monuments. It is a necropolis, a city of the dead, with thousands of tombs, shafts and chapels honeycombed into the fragile limestone. Many are unexcavated, many are unrecorded. Each one is a small, sealed system. To open it is to start a clock that cannot be stopped. Here we arrive at a difficult truth of heritage preservation. The desire to know, to see, to stand inside a place where history was made can be the most destructive force of all. The impulse to drill a hole to investigate an anomaly, or to clear a shaft to see what lies at the bottom, carries an irreversible price. The moment the seal is broken, the delicate equilibrium of millennia is gone forever. Preservation, then, sometimes demands a choice that feels like secrecy. It must weigh the curiosity of the present against the right of the future to inherit something other than our ruins. The frustration of a locked door is understandable, but the alternative is often a story that vanishes as soon as its page is turned. The challenge is not a simple conflict between heroic discoverers and stubborn bureaucrats. It is a tension between two competing forms of respect: the desire to share everything now and the duty to save something for later. So if breaking the seal is the greatest danger, if the human touch itself is a risk, how can the search possibly continue? How can we listen to the stone without shattering it? The story of this monument is also the story of the people who were drawn to it, each seeking something different in its silence. A young prince, Thutmose IV, saw a divine guardian in a dream, promising him a kingdom in exchange for freedom from the sand. Centuries later, Giovanni Caviglia arrived with shovels and tireless ambition, a man who saw a physical obstacle to be conquered, a body to be excavated. Then, a different kind of seeker, Edgar Cayce, saw not a body of stone, but a threshold, a door to a lost memory located by a vision. And in the late 20th century, the seekers changed again. Robert Schoch and Thomas Dobecki came not with shovels or visions, but with instruments designed to listen to the density of the bedrock, to trace the echoes of waves moving through ancient limestone. They were followed by the modern mappers and protectors, the teams from organizations like Ancient Egypt Research Associates, who sought not to open the Sphinx, but to record it with light and data to preserve it. The dreamer, the digger, the prophet, the measurer, the preserver. The monument itself has remained the constant, but the question posed to it has been remade by each generation. The Sphinx has not offered a clear reply to any of them. It has not confirmed the dream, nor surrendered to the shovel, nor opened the door, nor explained the echo. Instead, it seems to have done something else. It has absorbed their questions. The attention of the prince, the labour of the excavator, the map of the mystic, the readings of the geophysicist, the careful lines of the digital archivist, all of these have become part of the monument's immense story. The human search itself has become a layer of the archive. The record of our own patient, persistent and unanswered need to know has been written onto the history of the stone. After weighing the evidence for and against, after listening to the testimony of the limestone and the arguments of the geologists, a simple question remains. Why is the idea of a much older Sphinx so powerful? Even if the evidence remains debated, the appeal of the story is undeniable. What does it touch in us? Perhaps it's like exploring a house you have known your entire life, and discovering beneath the familiar floorboards the stone foundations of a much older, forgotten structure. The discovery does not erase the house you know. Instead, it deepens its mystery. It suggests the story of the place did not begin where you thought it did. The prospect of a Sphinx thousands of years older than the Fourth Dynasty offers a similar shock. It suggests a lost chapter of human history, a kind of genesis before the official genesis. It hints at the possibility of high culture, of monumental engineering, in an age we have been taught to see as the dawn of settled life, not its afternoon. It pushes the origin of our story back into a deeper, quieter, more mysterious past. This feeling is not so different from the one that animates the search for the Hall of Records. Both ideas tap into the same deep wellspring of human longing, a desire for a recoverable origin. One promises a sealed room containing the lost documents of our past. The other suggests the document is the monument itself, its scars a form of writing that tells of a forgotten age. Both are expressions of a hope that what has been lost is not gone forever, but merely waiting. And so, the argument over the scars on the enclosure walls is never just about geology. It is about the shape of our entire timeline. It's a debate over whether the story we tell ourselves about human progress is complete, or if there is an entire volume missing from the beginning. It asks whether our civilization is the first great effort, or one of several, the inheritor of a legacy so old we have forgotten its source. Understanding this emotional pressure is essential. The geological debate carries so much weight because what is truly on trial is our sense of the deep past. And when the timeline itself feels unstable, the search for any other piece of evidence, any other anomaly or hint of a hidden space, and becomes more urgent than ever. The Great Causeway of Khafre-era is more than a path. It is a line drawn across the earth. A grand ceremonial road connecting the world of the living at the Nile's edge to the world of the eternal king. It begins at the Valley Temple, a severe and beautiful structure of granite and limestone, and rises gently toward the mortuary temple that once stood at the foot of the second Great Pyramid. To walk this path, even in its ruined state, is to feel the logic of a vast machine. This was a transition between states of being, designed to be experienced. The walls would have enclosed the procession, cutting off the mundane world and focusing all attention on the ascent. The floor was paved, the ceiling once roofed against the sun. We can still see the scale of the construction in the size of the blocks, some weighing many tons, fitted with a precision that remains astounding. You can feel the sheer weight of the place, the permanence it was meant to convey. In the floors of the temples you can still find the empty sockets where colossal statues once stood. silent witnesses to rituals we can only partially reconstruct. This was not a place of quiet contemplation alone. It was an active, functioning apparatus for the soul of a king. And the Sphinx is not separate from this. It is not an isolated monument dropped into the sand as an afterthought. It is a key component, a guardian integrated into the southern side of this processional machine. It watches the sun rise, and it watches over the entrance to this sacred landscape. The entire complex, pyramid, temples, causeway, and Sphinx, works as one. It is a single, overwhelming statement of royal power and cosmic order, built to last for millions of years. This is what makes the question of a hidden chamber so difficult, and so compelling. When faced with this immense, unified, and very public declaration of a king's journey to the afterlife, the idea of a small, secret library from some other time feels almost impossible. It seems to violate the powerful, singular purpose of the entire landscape. But then, the thought reverses itself. If you were to hide the most important record in the world, the history of a lost age or a message for a distant future, where better to place it than inside the most enduring and powerful complex on Earth? Where better to seal a secret than within a monument designed to project power so completely that no one would think to look for a story that was not its own? The sheer physical reality of Khafre's Giza makes the accepted story feel solid as the bedrock it is carved from. The evidence is not a theory, but a landscape, and yet this only makes the persistence of the other story, the one about a hidden door, more stark. We have walked the path that runs beside the Guardian. Now we must look more closely at the Guardian itself. We return one last time to the right paw. It rests on the sand, unchanged by our inquiry. The limestone laid down in an ancient sea has been shaped by Pharaoh's quarrymen, weathered by millennia of sun and wind, and perhaps by forgotten rains. It has been buried and revealed. It has been measured by Thutmose's architects and by modern surveyors with lasers and ground-penetrating radar. It has been a canvas for prophecy, a target for instruments, a point on a map of belief. And after all of this, it remains what it has always been, a mass of silent stone. It is natural to feel a sense of incompletion, to wish for a final, decisive answer. An answer provides comfort. It closes a file. But there is another way to view the end of our journey. Perhaps a clear, simple answer is not the most valuable thing a monument like the Sphinx has to offer. Consider this. Imagine that tomorrow a definitive discovery is made. A drill, guided by the most precise scans, pierces the bedrock beneath the paw and enters a void. Cameras are lowered. The world watches, holding its breath for the revelation of the Hall of Records, and finds a small, empty chamber, or a modest tomb from a much later period, interesting to specialists but containing no lost history, no Atlantean tablets. The mystery would be solved. The great question that has pulled explorers and dreamers to this spot for centuries would be answered, and the answer would be mundane. The file would be closed. The Sphinx would become a monument with a known, uninteresting basement. In a strange but real way, the legend would die, and the monument itself would become smaller for it. The vastness of the question would be gone, replaced by a simple, disappointing fact. Its power, its gravity, seems to come not from a confirmed secret, but from the persistence of the question itself. The unresolved state is what holds our attention. It is the space in which imagination, inquiry, and science can all operate. It is the possibility, not the proof, that gives the monument its unique and enduring charge. Perhaps then the Sphinx's ultimate purpose is not to be a container for a final answer from the past. Perhaps its purpose is to be a question aimed at the future. It provokes us. The desire to know what lies beneath it has pushed people to develop more careful, more respectful ways of seeing. The debate over its scars has forced a deeper understanding of geology and the complex life of stone. The very restrictions on invasive exploration compel us to innovate, to find ways to listen to the past without destroying it. It is a catalyst. It is an engine for curiosity. In this reading, the enduring mystery is not a failure of our science or a sign of a conspiracy. It is the monument, perfectly performing its function. A guardian, after all, does not simply protect the treasure in the vault. It protects the threshold itself. The Sphinx guards the line between the known and the unknown. And by holding its silence, it ensures that we never stop looking, never stop questioning, and never stop learning how to ask our questions with greater care, greater precision, and greater humility. The silent guard is doing its job.